All right, we're going to go ahead and begin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. During today's webinar, we will focus on the balance sheet for Form 990-PF. I'll be your host for today's webinar. My name is Nikita. I am the product manager for Tax 990, and I have been working with Tax 990 for just over 3 years now. Just a few housekeeping items before we jump in. This presentation will be recorded and available at tax990.com after the webinar. We will also send an email to everybody that attended today, so you'll have a copy for your reference. If you have questions during the presentation, please add them to the chat and we will address those at the end of the webinar. And please note, we are not tax advisors or the IRS. We will not be giving specific tax advice, and we will not be able to advise on your specific organization status. We will primarily be talking about the process of filing the 990-PF and completing the balance sheet with Tax 990. If you have questions about your specific organization or Tax 990 account, you can absolutely reach out to our support team. Our introduction today for the 990-PF balance sheet. The 990-PF balance sheet is a part of the annual IRS tax return for private foundations in the U.S. It provides a snapshot of a foundation's financial health, showing what it owns as its assets, what it owes for liabilities, and what's left over after accounting for those, which are the net assets. During today's presentation, we will look at understanding what the balance sheet is, understanding how to read the balance sheet, understanding how to make it balance, most importantly, and we'll take a look at a demo of completing the balance sheet in Tax 990. So what is the 990-PF balance sheet? This is a financial report that summarizes the organization's assets and liabilities. It shows the IRS what is owned by the organization and what the organization owes to others. The balance sheet tells a story about how the organization operates financially during the year. It shows the growth, decrease, or sustainability of the organization during the reported tax year. Assets are what an organization owns. Liabilities are what the organization owes. And net assets are what's left over after subtracting the total liabilities from the total assets. Accounts receivable is money an organization is owed but has not yet been paid for. And accounts payable is debt owed but has not yet been paid. A book value is what you paid for the item or its worth when purchased. And fair market value is the amount you sold it for or worth of the item at the time of sale. BOY is for beginning of year and EOY is for end of year. We get a lot of questions just on verifying these specific terms within the filing process. So we'll start by talking about the assets. These are what the organization owns or what is owed to it. They're divided into two categories. You have your current assets reported on lines 1 through 9. These assets can be converted to cash or used within a year. Examples include cash receivables and short-term investments. We have non-current assets reported on lines 10 through 15, which are long-term assets like buildings, equipment, or long-term investments that will be held for more than a year. Line 16 will be the combined total of all reported assets from lines 1 through 15. Examples of assets could include cash, which is the organization's cash on hand or in the bank, accounts receivable, which is money owed to the organization, such as unpaid donations, land, buildings, and equipment, and the value of any property or equipment owned, or investments, including stocks, bonds, or investments the organization holds. Now we'll talk about liabilities, which are what an organization owes to others. Similar to the assets category, liabilities are divided into two categories of current liabilities, which are obligations due within a year, like accounts payable or short-term loans, and non-current liabilities, which are long-term liabilities such as mortgages or long-term debt. Examples of liabilities could include accounts payable or money the foundation owes to vendors or service providers, grants payable, which are promised donations that haven't been given out yet, with loans and mortgages. If the foundation borrowed money, it would be shown here. Net assets and fund balances are reported on lines 24 through 30. This is what is left over. These represent the organization's equity or its residual value after all liabilities have been subtracted from the assets. Net assets are categorized into unrestricted net assets, which are funds that the organization can use for any purpose. Temporary restricted net assets, which are funds restricted by donors for a specific purpose or time period. Or permanently restricted net assets, which are endowment or funds that must be maintained indefinitely. Only the income generated by these can be used. The total of these lines represents the net worth of the organization. Now, how does it all tie together? So the sum of the assets are the sum of everything the organization owns. Liabilities, the sum of everything the organization owes, and net assets is what's left after liabilities are subtracted from assets. That's considered the organization's equity. The balance sheet balances when the total assets equals the sum of liabilities or net assets. So assets equals liabilities plus net assets. Before we jump into the demo, we'll just, as a reminder, the balance sheet is essential for filing the 990 PF. It'll provide a clear picture of the financial year for your organization. For additional questions or guidance, you can visit our knowledge base or to learn more, or contact our support team for assistance. We also have a significant YouTube channel that has a lot of how-to guides and videos on completing that process. Now I'm going to go ahead and get logged into my account here, and we will do a quick demonstration of completing the balance sheet on the 990 PF together. Just one moment while I get logged into my account. All right, sorry for that delay. So I've logged into my Tax 990 account. I do have an in-progress 990 PF ready for us. So I'm going to go ahead and continue filing there. I apologize, my testing site for the webinars is running just a little bit slow today. Please bear with me. Now, if you filed with Tax 990 before, I'm sure you know that the site does not typically operate slowly. It's pretty efficient. Sometimes with our testing site, we do see a little bit of a lag in the page loading. The testing site is not connected to the IRS, so it allows us to host these webinars without actually sending information or sharing it with the IRS. So now that I've logged into my account, I've went back to my in progress form. You can see I'm working on a 990 PF here, and I'm using our form-based filing format. So when you first start the form, you'll have to complete part 1 to explain your revenue and expenses from the year. That section is going to correlate with the balance sheet section on part 2. So I did go ahead and input my part 1 details here. So you can see I've listed my contributions, my expenses, and it's calculated at my revenue over expenses at the bottom. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump to page 2, which is where we will complete our balance sheet information. Page 2, part 2, allows you to input your assets and liabilities for the beginning of year and end of year. Calculations will come from your book value, but you will be able to enter the fair market value if applicable for your details. I'm going to go ahead and put some numbers in here so you can see the calculations. I'm going to add cash assets for both beginning and end of year, and a fair market value of those. I'm going to, just for demonstration purposes, to show your calculations, you'll enter the values on each applicable category. So I'm going to go ahead and put a value on a couple of different categories to show you the calculations at the bottom. So we've got our beginning of year assets, end of year assets, fair market value listed in two different categories, grants receivable and cash non-interest bearing. Now, if we scroll down, you'll see on line 16 that those values have automatically calculated based on this information that we've provided. So it will take a lot of your calculation out of the process, as we'll automatically do that part for you. We do have a red box around this at this time and a little error code, but for now we'll go ahead and disregard that because that'll come into play later on the form. Any categories such as investments or other assets, you can use the add info icon to populate those details. When you click that icon, you'll be able to provide an explanation and those detailed values. We're going to go ahead and proceed with our liabilities. Again, I'm going to enter my liabilities for beginning and end of year. Now, liabilities do not have a fair market value. It's just strictly book value of those liabilities. And again, those are going to calculate at the bottom here under line 23 for total liabilities. If I had adjusted that and, excuse me, separated that into two line items, it would still calculate down here at the bottom for me by adding those details. The liabilities have the same option to add additional details or other liabilities not listed by using the Add Info button. As we scroll down, we'll work on our net assets or fund balances. Now, it is a requirement to choose either a foundation that follows FASB or a foundation that does not follow FASB. You would need to contact the IRS if you're not sure which one of those you qualify for. But based on your selection in that field, the additional line items will populate for you to complete. So if I choose do not follow, then lines 26, 27, and 28 will populate. If I choose we do follow, then lines 24 and 25 will populate. Now for these fields, for lines 24 and 25, we need to take the difference between our assets and liabilities. So we'll subtract this $15,000 from our $100,000 to calculate that $85,000 value. We can enter it on the necessary line items and it'll calculate accordingly like all other lines for both beginning and end of year. So over here, we'll calculate the difference between our assets and liabilities and subtract that $12,000 from the $136,000. And now you'll see those red boxes we talked about have gone away because our fields down here have populated accordingly. So entering the difference here on lines 24 and 25, or alternately 26 through 28, will generate your total equations at the bottom. And it'll tell you here that this number on line 29 was an auto-calculated sum of lines 24 and 25, or alternately lines 26 through 28. So line 29 is calculated by adding these fields, and line 30 is auto-calculated by the sum of lines 23 and 29. So taking your total liabilities, adding your assets over fund balances, will calculate your total liabilities and net assets or fund balances for both beginning and end of year. The other piece to keep in mind is your analysis of changes in net assets or fund balances will also need to calculate accordingly. If our line 29 does not match our line 30, we will have an error there, and we can adjust that by either reviewing our details on the balance sheet or by making adjustments using the add info button. So for example, let's make a small adjustment here and I'll show you what that's going to look like. Because this no longer matches this number, so because 29B no longer matches line 6 on part 3, we have an error. Now we can adjust that by adding a decrease or increase if necessary. If we add a decrease of that cleared the error that is related to line 29 and line 6. However, we do still have an error on line 30 because now our values don't match up above. So there are a lot of very specific calculations that you need to make, but there are a lot of areas that you can go back and adjust those if necessary. I'm going to go ahead and delete this so we can just one more time go over how that adjustment is made. And it's going to refresh. Again, we've cleared all of the errors we have on this section. If this number on part 3, line 6 does not match, if you have an error, you need to go back to part 2 or part 1 and adjust those values accordingly, or provide an increase or decrease on part 3. As most of you know, we do have the internal audit with our software. So as you work through the form, you'll get errors related to IRS form instructions to make sure you're meeting all of the guidelines. Those are going to be all of those little red boxes and red exclamation points we saw throughout the process of completing the balance sheet. Any additional errors are going to generate on this tab over here, and it'll explain the error to you, allow you to fix the error, and proceed with filing. So this one is telling us that we have an issue on part 3. That is an old error, so once we refresh that, it should go away. Yep, so that's all gone. So now all of our errors are resolved and we can proceed with filing. I'll just answer Tim's question real quick since we're on the demonstration point. Tim was wondering why there would be a difference in the book value and fair market value of cash. There necessarily wouldn't be, Tim. We wouldn't be able to advise on that one way or the other. But for the demonstration purposes, I did add that in there. Now, if you had a savings or something else that you're reporting, like grants or inventory that you're reporting as an asset, that may very likely have a different fair market value than what the book value is. So it's definitely going to be related to your accounts payable. And if you have questions on that, you would need to speak with a financial advisor. But most often on cash, non-interest bearing, there's not a fair market value. But the fair market value doesn't have to be there either. You can definitely take that away and it won't cause any issues on your balance sheet at the bottom here. All right, I'm going to just jump back over to our presentation and we can answer a few more questions if you have them. So again, if you're filing a 990 PF with Tax 990 and you want to learn more about the filing requirements, please visit us at tax990.com. We have an extensive knowledge base and a YouTube channel with a lot of helpful information. And we've recently released an AI bot within the application. So when you log into your Tax 990 account, there's a little robot icon at the top right of the screen that is an AI feature. And you can add your questions there as well to help get quick answers during your filing process. Of course, if you don't find answers to your questions using all of those different avenues, like our knowledge base, our YouTube channel, our blogs, our AI bot, we have an experienced live support team available Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. We have phone, email, and chat support available, and we are ready and happy to assist you during that process. We will take a couple of minutes to answer some questions before we finish up for the day. I do have somebody wanting to see the process of the add info section again, so let me just pull that back up. I can show that to you, Sandra, very quickly. So if I'm understanding it right, let's see, can you show the steps again into adjusting previous input in the add info button. Of course, so on all of these categories, you'll see an add info option. Excuse me. So if we want to add info for other assets, we would click add info. We would explain the other assets. We can input our values and click add. We're going to say no fair market value. We're going to click add. Now that's going to show up on the list section once we've added it. So we can go back and we can add another item. And again, that will show up on our list. Now when we exit this screen, you'll see the total calculation of all of those other assets added here on that line that we just added. If you need to go back and view that info or edit that info, you just click the view icon. You can delete those items, which we're going to go ahead and do. You can either delete an individual one using the trash can icon or bulk delete using this check mark box here. We're going to go ahead and delete those. Refresh. And now that other asset section will be gone. So that's how the add info button works throughout the entire form on all of those options. If you do have questions during that process, definitely reach out to us. We'd be happy to show you in more detail what that process looks like or help you resolve any issues you're having with it. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time. Again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We also have a webinar coming up next week to review the entire process and features when filing with Tax 990. I know that we sent an email out on that earlier in the week, I believe this week, but if you'd like to join that webinar, you can visit tax990.com/webinars and register for that one as well. And again, we'll talk about features, we'll talk about the audit and the process of filing, we'll go through the signature portion and other things leading up to the November 15th deadline so that you guys can get started now and remain compliant and on time. Since we don't have any other questions coming in, I will go ahead and close up this webinar for today. Thank you everybody for joining us, and please reach out if you have any questions. Have a great rest of your day.